The town of Stonebridge looked peaceful on the surface. Tree-lined streets, trimmed lawns, clean sidewalks. Everything appeared in place, like a photograph no one dared to smudge. But underneath the polite nods and soft greetings lived an unspoken rule. Stay in your lane. Not just on the roads, but in life, at school, at work, even on the bus. Grace Monroe noticed it the moment she and her mother moved into their quiet rental home at the edge of town. It was the kind of town where neighbors waved with only 2 fingers and where eyes followed you a second longer if your skin was darker than theirs. You could almost hear the silence pressing against the walls. Grace was 16, tall for her age, with warm brown skin, sharp eyes, and braided hair that she tied into a bun each morning. She didn't talk much, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she'd learned that in places like this, silence could be stronger than shouting. Her mother, Camille Monroe, worked night shifts at the local hospital. She was the kind of woman who could take a deep breath and push through anything. A single mother for the last 4 years, Camille carried the weight of their small family with tired hands and hopeful eyes. She didn't complain, just set the alarm, tied her head wrap, and showed up. Grace's father, Elijah, had passed away when she was 12. He'd been a boxing coach at a downtown community gym in Cleveland, the kind of man who said more with a glance than a lecture. On quiet nights, Grace would still hear his voice. "Don't swing to scare 'em, baby girl. Swing to mean it." Their new home in Stonebridge was small but clean. The paint was chipped in places and the heater knocked in protest every morning. But it was theirs. On that first Monday morning in February, Grace woke to the smell of garlic and coffee. Her mother had already made breakfast, toast and scrambled eggs, and packed a lunch with handwritten notes tucked between napkins. "You ready?" Camille asked, leaning on the door frame. Grace pulled on her hoodie, slipping her earbuds in. "As I'll ever be." "Keep your head high," Grace smiled faintly. "Always." She stepped outside. The air was cold enough to sting. Frost covered the lawns, and the rising sun barely peeked through the gray clouds. Her breath puffed in. White swirls as she waited at the curb, earbuds playing an old-school soul track her dad used to hum. Then she saw it. The yellow bus lumbering down the road like it didn't want to be up either. It squeaked to a stop in front of her. The doors opened with a tired hiss. Grace stepped on, and immediately she felt it. No greeting from the driver. He was an older man in his 60s with thinning hair and a coffee-stained polo. His eyes barely met hers. He just shifted into drive, before she even found a seat. Inside, the air was thick with laughter and the buzz of teen voices. But the moment Grace entered the aisle, things got quieter. Not silent, just uneasy. The kind of hush that settles in when someone different enters a room full of sameness. She walked slowly, every step like a drumbeat. Students watched her with half-hidden glances. Some whispered behind their hands. Some looked away too quickly. She found an empty seat near the front and slid into it. Her backpack rested on her lap like a shield. A girl behind her let out a muffled giggle. A boy near the window muttered something under his breath. Grace couldn't catch the words, but the tone was clear. Mocking, curious, amused. She didn't react. Her father had taught her that stillness was power. "Let them guess what you're thinking," he used to say. "Let them wonder how far you'll go if they push too hard." Grace had been the new girl too many times to count. Cleveland, Memphis, Detroit, now here. But Stonebridge felt colder than any of those places, not just in weather but in spirit. She didn't see a single face that looked like hers. No cousins, no childhood friends, no backup, just her. But she wasn't afraid. Life had taught her how to read rooms and measure people. She knew when to speak and when silence was louder. That morning, she chose silence. She stared out the window, watching bare trees blur past, listening to the uneasy giggles behind her. She refused to shrink. refused to react. But someone on that bus had already picked her out, and he was waiting. Tuesday came, and everything looked the same on the outside. The sky still sulked behind thick clouds. The bus still groaned to a stop. The driver still ignored her existence. But this time, Brady Whitman was ready. Brady sat dead center, like the sun in a sad solar system. 3 boys sat around him, orbiting his every word. They were the kind of boys who laughed a little too, hard at bad jokes, who needed someone to follow so they wouldn't get noticed themselves. Grace stepped on the bus, head high, same walk, same hoodie. She moved down the aisle with quiet confidence. As she passed Brady's row, his foot suddenly slid out, just barely brushing the edge of her sneaker. She didn't stumble, but she noticed. She paused for half a heartbeat, then kept walking. No reaction, no glare, nothing. That silence, it made Brady itch. "Hey!" he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Front seats are for students who belong here. Try the back." The words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Thick, sharp, unnecessary. Nobody laughed. Not yet. Even Brady's boys looked unsure, but Brady grinned like a villain in a low-budget movie, acting like he was correcting some cosmic mistake. Grace turned slowly, her eyes locked with his. Her voice came out cool as a winter breeze. "I'm good where I am." 3 seconds of silence followed. It felt like the whole bus was holding its breath. Then one of Brady's sidekicks, short kid with braces and a hoodie 3 sizes too big, let out a weak snort. It was just enough. A ripple of nervous giggles spread across the rows. Whispers, awkward side eyes. Some kids just sank into their phones. Grace stayed still, didn't blink. She had dealt with worse. She had stood across from kids twice her size in a boxing ring and kept her stance. And right. Now? She wasn't moving. She turned back toward the front and sat down. The seat felt colder than before, but she didn't flinch. Brady leaned back with a smirk, arms stretched across the seat like he owned it. But deep down, he hated what had just happened. She hadn't reacted the way he wanted. No fear, no anger, just calm defiance, and that made her dangerous. By the time the bus reached Stonebridge High, the whispers had already started spinning into rumors. The new girl with the stare. The one who didn't blink. The one who didn't back down. Stonebridge High looked impressive from the outside. Tall brick walls, glass doors that gleamed under gray skies, banners hanging by the entrance boasting academic excellence and winning traditions. But Grace Monroe had learned that some buildings only looked warm from a distance. Inside, it was polished and proper, floors buffed to a shine, whiteboards spotless, hallways wide and echoing. Teachers spoke with smiles, but their eyes scanned her just a second too long. Students huddled in groups by lockers, their laughter bouncing off the lockers like drum beats. Grace wasn't invited to join. They didn't say anything cruel, not yet. But the coldness was loud. Some students glanced and looked away quickly. Others gave tight-lipped nods like checking off a box. A few whispered behind textbooks or stared longer than they meant to. It wasn't open hate. It was the type that slipped into silence, into space. Like she was a guest in their world, Grace walked those halls alone, her steps measured, her chin high. She wasn't new to this kind of treatment. She knew how to breathe through it, how to hold her peace like armor. But that peace was getting harder to carry. It started, as things often do, on the bus. Brady Whitman had claimed his throne midway down the aisle, surrounded by his usual crew, Kai, Noah, and Miles. He sat like a ruler, arms stretched along the top of the seat, legs wide, owning space he never earned. As Grace made her way down the aisle that Friday morning, Brady tilted his head back, lazy smirk creeping across his face. "You new around here?" he asked, though his voice already knew the answer. Grace didn't respond. She'd been raised better than to entertain fools. Brady leaned forward. "Thought so. Locals know the rules." Grace raised one brow, her voice calm. "Oh? And what rules are those?" He gave a slow shrug, pretending to be helpful. "You stick with your kind. Stay where you fit. Front of the bus ain't one of those places." And there it was. No clever disguise. No twisted metaphor. Just truth soaked in arrogance. The driver didn't say a word. Just kept looking straight ahead, hands on the wheel, like the insult was wind passing through the windows. Grace exhaled through her nose, steady and quiet. She turned and sat in her seat near the front like nothing happened. No clapback, no fire. But that silence? Brady mistook it for defeat. And that's when it began. He started small, comments tossed like darts. Just sharp enough for her to hear, soft enough to dodge consequences. "Smells different in here since Monday. You hear they got a program for people like her? Bet. She eats for free." He made sure to speak loud enough. Made sure his boys could hear. Made sure everyone knew she was an outsider. It wasn't just the words. It was the way backpacks got pulled tighter when she passed, like she was dangerous. The exaggerated coughs, the sideways glances, people shifting their legs, pretending to need space. Phones rose like shields when she entered the frame. Still, Grace held her ground. "Keep your peace," she whispered to herself every morning. "Don't let a fool turn you into one." Her mom used to say people like Brady feared what they didn't understand, that their fear dressed up in different costumes. Sarcasm, jokes, fake confidence, but fear nonetheless. So she gave him nothing. No reaction. No fuel. She just walked on, but Brady couldn't stand being ignored. The more she stayed silent, the more he craved a response. He needed her to flinch, to fold, to fight, and when she didn't, he got louder. By the end of her first week, Grace knew that, bus like a map, every squeaky seat, every cracked window, every pair of eyes that trailed her like she wore a target on her back. Brady made sure of it. His insults became clockwork, routine. Every morning, same show. Some days it was her hair. Some days her shoes. Some days nothing at all. Just a crooked smile and a slow whisper that made his friends laugh. Kai, always chewing gum, was his echo, repeating whatever Brady said just a beat behind. Noah, small and wiry, tried the hardest, laughed too loud, pointed too much. He was desperate to be seen, and Miles stayed quiet, but not in the way Grace did. His silence was the heavy kind. The kind that let wrong things happen and said nothing. And then, there were the others. The ones who sat close but acted like they didn't notice, eyes glued to their screens, headphones in without music, pretending, avoiding, surviving. Grace didn't blame them, not really. Everyone on that bus had learned the same lesson. Don't draw attention. But knowing that didn't stop the sting. Friday came. The sky was the same dull gray. The cold air bit at her cheeks. Grace stepped onto the bus, same as always. She made it halfway down the aisle when Brady struck again. This time his foot jutted out fast, angled just right. The tip of her shoe caught his boot. She stumbled, not enough to fall, but enough. Her binder slipped from her fingers, scattering papers like wind-blown leaves down the aisle. Brady grinned wide. "Oops," he said, loud and fake sweet. "Didn't see you there." Kai barked a laugh like it was the best joke he'd ever heard. Noah slapped the back of the seat in front of him, howling like a cartoon. Miles stared at the floor. Grace didn't say a word. She bent down, one knee to the floor, and gathered her papers slowly, one by one. Her hands didn't shake. Her jaw stayed locked. She rose to her feet with a calm that felt like thunder right before it breaks. Then, she met Brady's eyes and said, cool and clear, "Didn't see you either." The laughter died, just like that. Brady blinked. His mouth twitched like he wanted to say something, but no words came. He wasn't used to this. He was used to people folding. people shrinking, people ducking out of his way. But Grace looked at him like he wasn't even worth the effort. And that silence, that was power. The rest of the ride, the bus was quiet. Not the fake kind from before. This was real, thick, tense. The kind that made you feel your own breath. Grace stared out the window, her binder clutched to her chest. Her cheeks burned, but she refused to cry. Her hands had gripped that binder so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale. But still, no tears. Not here. Not for him. That afternoon, she walked home slower than usual. Her boots crunched over frozen grass, and the wind tugged at the ends of her braids. When she stepped inside, the house smelled of onions and garlic, soft and familiar. The kitchen light hummed. The old wall clock ticked too loud. Her mother, Camille, stood at the counter, slicing. Red peppers for a quick stir-fry before work. She glanced up once. Tough day? Grace shrugged, dropping her bag by the door. Same as always. Camille watched her for a beat, then returned to chopping. You know, she said softly, your dad used to say, people don't mess with quiet storms. They pretend not to notice, but deep down, they know it's there. They feel it. And they respect it. Grace didn't respond. She didn't have to. She heard every word. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle. The windows. Her muscles ached, not from fighting, but from holding everything in. Even storms had limits, and Brady Whitman was about to find hers. Saturday morning brought silence. No bus, no cold stares, no comments, just quiet. Grace still woke up early, habit, from years of boxing drills. She padded down the stairs in socks, grabbed a bottle of water, and headed into the garage. The garage always smelled like dust and memories. It wasn't much. A single bulb hung overhead, flickering every now and then, and old cardboard boxes sat pushed against the walls, filled with things they didn't have space for inside. But in one corner, right beneath a crooked window that let in a sliver of morning light, hung something sacred. Her father's punching bag, worn leather, scarred and patched with strips of duct tape. Time had eaten away at the seams, but it still stood strong, just like him. Grace stepped in quietly, the cold concrete floor biting through her socks. She didn't turn on music, didn't grab her phone. She didn't need noise. This space was already full, with weight, with memory, with a rhythm she knew better than her own heartbeat. Her gloves, once enormous on her tiny fingers, now fit her hands like skin. She slid them on slowly, one finger at a time, then tightened, the straps with a steady tug. The leather creaked. She closed her eyes for a second. In her mind, she could see him standing behind her like he used to. Tall, calm, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Breathe first, he used to whisper. Every hit starts with breath. Don't fight to hurt, Gracie. Fight to be clear. Grace opened her eyes. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt ready. She stepped forward and let her fists speak. A jab. Clean, sharp. Then another, faster. Her breathing synchronized with the motion. Inhale, swing, exhale, recover. She wasn't thinking about Brady or the stairs or the silence on that bus. She was right here, in control, grounded. Her feet moved across the concrete floor in tight circles, following the bag as it swayed gently from her hits. Pop. Pop, pop. Pause. Pop. Sweat gathered at her temples, slid down her jaw. She didn't stop. She remembered her dad telling her, "The loudest person in the room ain't always the strongest. Let them make noise. You keep your balance." And she had. All week she had. Until now. The bag swayed a little harder as her punches picked up pace. She wasn't swinging wildly. She wasn't chasing power. She was reminding herself that no matter what Brady said, what those boys laughed at, what the others ignored. She was still here, still centered, still standing. Behind her, the garage door creaked. Camille peeked in, still in her scrubs, hair wrapped in a scarf, keys in hand. "You all right in here?" Her voice was soft, motherly, but alert. Grace slowed, dropping her arms, catching her breath. "Yeah," she said between slow exhales. "Want pancakes?" Grace cracked a small smile. "Maybe later." Her mom didn't press. She stepped inside, walked over to the wall, and rested her fingers lightly on the old gloves hanging there, her husband's, cracked and sun-faded. Then she turned to her daughter. "You know he'd be proud, right?" Grace didn't speak, but her throat tightened. Camille didn't push. She just walked up, placed a warm hand on her daughter's shoulder, gave it a gentle squeeze, and walked back out. Afterward, Grace sat on the porch for a long while. The morning sun had stretched across the yard, casting long shadows from the trees. Kids zoomed by on bicycles, their tires buzzing over the pavement. They laughed loudly, free, but it wasn't the kids she noticed. It was the parents, standing nearby, arms folded, pretending to chat, but eyes trailing her every move. Grace had seen that look before, in every city, every school. Not anger, not kindness, just fear. Like she was something they couldn't quite name, so they labeled her dangerous by default. It didn't surprise her, but it still hurt. She didn't want to be a fighter every day. Sometimes, she just wanted peace. But peace didn't come easy in a place that treated your presence like a question mark. And Monday? Monday was waiting like a storm behind the curtain. She woke early. Not from noise, not from dreams, just readiness. Her body felt stiff, like it already knew something was coming. She brushed her hair into 2 braids, neat and tight. Pulled. On her gray hoodie, slipped into her sneakers and grabbed her bag. Her mom was at the door, holding a granola bar. "You sure you're good?" Camille asked, searching her face. Grace nodded after a pause. "Yeah, I'm all right." Camille didn't. "Push!" She kissed her forehead and stepped aside. The bus arrived earlier than usual, brakes hissing louder than they had all week. She climbed aboard. Same tired driver, same blank stare. She moved down the aisle, but this time, the silence was sharper. Tighter. Brady was already on his feet. He stood in the middle of the aisle, directly in front of her seat, blocking it. His boys flanked him, Kai with that goofy smirk, Noah bouncing his leg, and Miles. Still quiet, still watching everything. Grace stopped a few steps away. "Didn't you hear me last week?" Brady said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "That seat's not for people like you." She tilted her head slightly, voice cool. "Really? Who's it for?" Brady grinned, slow and smug. "Somebody who earned it." "Guess that's not you then," she said, eyes locked with his. Gasps fluttered down the rows. A few chuckles. One voice whispered, "She bold." Brady stepped forward, too close now. The bus hadn't moved yet. The driver hadn't set up. "Word. You don't belong here," he said, his voice tightening. Grace didn't move. "Then I guess you're in the wrong aisle. Step aside." Kai's mouth dropped open. Noah leaned forward, eager for what came next. Miles stared at the window like maybe it would open a portal to anywhere else. Brady laughed, one of those hollow laughs that didn't touch his eyes. "Careful," he said, chest puffing. "You're pushing it." Grace didn't blink. "Then push back." He shoved her. Not enough to knock her over, just enough to show off, just enough to say, "This is my space." Gasps turned to a stunned silence. Something inside Grace cracked, quietly, cleanly, like a branch breaking under pressure. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her fists in rage. She just let go. Her backpack dropped to the floor with a soft thud. Her feet adjusted, one behind the other, her hands slowly curled into fists. Her eyes locked onto Brady's like a storm was forming behind them. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh no." Brady blinked, still wearing that smug grin, thinking this was all just for show. It wasn't. In one smooth step, Grace shifted left, slipped past his shoulder, and launched a tight, controlled punch into his ribs. Not wild, not theatrical, just honest. The thud of impact wasn't loud, but Brady's gasp was. His whole body jerked, his knees bent slightly, his face flushed crimson as the air punched its way out of his lungs. He grabbed his side, staggering back a step, mouth hanging, open. Grace stepped back. Her voice was calm, steady. "That was a warning." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "If you touch me again," she added, "you'll learn what I don't hold back." The bus fell silent. A heavy, weighted silence. Even the engine seemed to grow quiet, like the entire vehicle had frozen. The driver, who hadn't reacted to anything all week, turned fully in his seat now, eyebrows climbing his forehead as he looked between them. Brady was bent forward, clutching his ribs, lips tight. "You insane," he hissed. Grace leaned down, picked up her bag, and slung it over her shoulder. "No," she said. "I just don't accept being pushed." She walked right past him, not in a hurry, not gloating, just done. She slid into her usual seat and looked, out the window, like nothing had happened. No one laughed. No one dared. Kai sat with his mouth hanging open, unsure whether to breathe or speak. Noah stared hard at his lap like the floor was the most fascinating thing on earth. Even Miles, the silent shadow in Brady's circle, sat frozen, his jaw tight, his gaze unreadable. The ride continued in absolute silence. No jokes, no whispers, just a bus full of kids unsure of what had just shifted in front of them. Grace felt the eyes, of course. She could practically feel them peeling across her back, but she didn't turn. Her heart was racing, her breath shallow, but she held her expression still. She had no regrets. She'd been patient, polite, quiet, and when the line had been crossed, she'd stood up. She hadn't exploded. She'd chosen her moment. For the first time in a week, Grace felt something close to power settle into her chest. It didn't roar. It pulsed. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot, because school hadn't even started yet. And school had its own way of spreading stories. By second period, the entire student body seemed to know. She walked into algebra and conversations. Died mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes flicked toward her and then away, as if unsure whether to smile or stay silent. Some kids looked at her like she'd lit a fire. Others looked like they wanted to run. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't fear. It was something between the two. Confusion, maybe. Curiosity wrapped. Intention. Brady wasn't in class. The rumor floating around said he'd gone to the nurse's office. Said he was injured. Said he got jumped. That made Grace snort under her breath. Jumped? She hit him once. One clean shot, and now he was rewriting the story. The absurdity made her jaw tighten. Ms. Flannery, the algebra teacher, didn't. Call roll like usual. She was already looking at Grace. Just before the bell rang, she walked over to her desk and spoke softly. "Grace, the principal needs to see you." Grace nodded, already expecting it. She packed her things slowly and stood, walking out with her head held high. The hallway wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Two boys near the lockers paused, their conversation to stare. A group of girls near the vending machine whispered quickly, one of them side-eyeing Grace as if trying to decide if she was trouble or legend. One girl, tall, pale, blonde hair in a tight braid, sat with her friends. Along the lockers, she didn't whisper. She didn't even pretend to look away. She just stared. Her eyes were sharp, like she was still trying to calculate how Grace had entered this school, this town, this world she'd thought belonged only to her. Grace didn't flinch. She walked like her steps had weight, like she belonged, even if she had to claim that space one stare at a time. She arrived at the principal's office and knocked once before stepping in. Principal Darius sat behind his large desk, fingers laced, eyes already on her. He didn't look angry, but he didn't look friendly either. "Grace," he said, nodding once. "Come in. Close the door." She did. "Have a seat." She stayed standing. "I've heard some troubling reports from this morning's bus ride," he began. His tone was formal, practiced. Grace waited. "Brady Whitman is currently with the nurse," he continued. "Says he's in pain. Says there was a physical incident." Principal Darius's voice was calm, but Grace could feel the tension weaving underneath it. "So, did he explain why he thinks you attacked him?" he asked, eyes watching her closely. Grace folded her arms. "He said I attacked him? He claims," Darius said, steepling his fingers, "that he asked you to move, and you responded with physical aggression." A dry, disbelieving laugh slipped from Grace's throat. "That's not how it went." "I'm not saying I believe him," Darius said quickly, leaning back in his chair. "But this situation isn't just about who said what. It's bigger than that now." Grace kept her face still. "You could ask the other students." "We already are," he replied. "We've begun speaking with them. But while that process unfolds, I need you to understand something clearly. This school takes any act of physical conflict very seriously, even when someone feels provoked." Her jaw tightened. "So, let me get this straight. I'm supposed to let someone shove me around? Not defend myself? That's not what I'm saying. It's what it feels like." The silence that followed was dense. Darius didn't respond right away. He looked at her, then sighed and opened the drawer beside him. He pulled out a pink slip and laid it flat on the desk. "1 day in school suspension," he said. "You'll stay in room 12A for the day. Your mother has already been informed." Grace walked forward slowly, picked up the slip without a word, and turned to go. But just before she reached the door, his voice stopped her again. "Grace," he said softly, "I know being the new kid isn't easy, especially in a place like this. But meeting fire with fire doesn't put the flames out." She paused, looked over her shoulder. "I didn't start the fire," she said. "I just made sure it didn't burn me." Then she walked out, head high. That night, dinner was quiet. Her mother didn't ask questions, didn't raise her voice. Camille simply ladled out the stew, placed a warm slice of bread beside Grace's plate, and sat down across from her. The clink of silverware and the distant hum of the fridge filled the silence between them. "You're not surprised?" Grace finally said, eyes fixed on her food. Camille shook her head gently. "I told you, protect your peace." "I did," Grace said. "I really tried." "I know, baby, that doesn't mean stay silent." Grace didn't respond, but something in her chest shifted. All week she'd swallowed her words, let herself shrink. Not because she was scared, but because she was tired of having to be strong just to be safe. Now they'd seen her, not the version they'd tried to paint, the real her. And there was no turning back from that. Camille reached across the table and placed her hand on Grace's. That was all. That was enough. The next morning, the air on the bus was different. Not loud, not cruel, just still. Grace stepped on like she always did. Same old tired driver pretending not to notice her. Same kids slouched in their usual seats. But Brady's seat, empty. And as she walked past it, no one giggled, no one whispered. She sat down without looking at anyone and stared out the window, the cold glass pressing against her temple. Behind her, someone cleared their throat, but it wasn't followed by laughter. Nobody dared, and for the first time, Grace let a small, quiet smile slip onto her face. But she knew better than to trust peace that came too easily. Peace that didn't include everyone was just silence pretending to be safety. Brady returned 2 days later. He didn't say a word, didn't even look her way. But the bruise on his side hadn't faded. He walked slower now, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of what happened hadn't settled in his bones, but in his pride. That morning, Grace was already seated, eyes forward, earbuds in with no music playing, just a barrier to the world. She saw him approach through the reflection on the window, saw how the bravado in his stride had dimmed, like a balloon that had been pricked, not popped, but deflated just enough to remind it that it wasn't invincible. He didn't stop at a row. He didn't speak. He just kept walking, head down. And Grace didn't smile this time. She didn't gloat. She just exhaled slowly, letting that moment pass through her without sticking. A few minutes later, something unexpected happened. A girl slid quietly into the seat beside her. Grace glanced up. It was Liana, the quiet girl who always sat 3 rows back with a sketchbook open, always drawing and never speaking. She didn't say hello at first. She just opened her notebook and started sketching as usual, the scratch of her, pencil barely audible. Then she spoke without looking up. "You were right to hit him." Grace blinked. "What?" Liana shrugged. "He's been messing with people since elementary, pushing, teasing, acting like he owns everything. Someone had to finally call him out." Grace stared at her. "Why didn't anybody say anything?" Liana didn't lift her eyes. "Because everyone's scared to lose whatever quiet they have. Some don't want to draw attention. Others don't want to be the next one targeted." Grace nodded slowly, letting that sink in. It wasn't cowardice. It was survival. People weren't avoiding the fight because they didn't care. They were just tired of being targets. Liana looked at her, then really looked. "But you didn't flinch," she said. "And now, people see him differently." Grace looked out the window again. She wasn't trying to make a statement that day. She was just tired of carrying silence like a shield. Grace understood now. Everything Liana had said that morning echoed in her mind like a quiet drumbeat. Fear didn't always look like trembling or hiding. Sometimes it wore the face of indifference. Sometimes silence wasn't just absence of noise, it was armor. But when someone speaks, really speaks, it can shake even the strongest silence loose. That afternoon, it started small. A boy from her biology class, whose name she didn't even know, rushed forward when her books slipped in the hallway. "Let me get that," he said, voice low, eyes avoiding hers. She nodded, surprised, but said nothing as he handed them back. Later, in front of the library, another student pushed the door open and stepped back, gesturing for her to walk through first. A quiet courtesy, the kind that hadn't existed before. No stares, no smirks, just recognition. Not everyone celebrated the shift. Brady's crew still watched her with hard eyes. Every time she passed, Kai's jaw clenched. Noah whispered too loudly when she was near, hoping she'd flinch. But none of them stepped toward her. None dared. Their game had ended, and they knew it. But the most unexpected moment came after. 7th period. She was walking to her locker, mind somewhere between exhaustion and relief, when she heard footsteps rushing behind her. "Grace, hey, wait." She turned. It was Miles. His face was red, eyes darting around like he wasn't sure if he should even be there. He stopped a few feet away, hands fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. He stammered. "I saw what happened that day on the bus." Grace stayed quiet, her arms crossed. Miles swallowed. "I should have done something. I should have said something." She tilted her head slightly. "But you didn't." "I know." He looked down at his shoes, his voice barely a whisper. "I was scared, not of you, of them. of being the next target. His honesty didn't make it better, but it made it real. Grace studied him for a moment, then spoke. "You still can." He looked up, confused. "Speak up. Next time. That's how this ends." Miles nodded slowly, his eyes steady now. Yeah. Okay." He turned and walked off, shoulders lighter than before. By Friday, the weight in the hallways had shifted. The tension hadn't disappeared. It had transformed. Grace still took the same path to school, still sat in the same seat near the front of the bus, still walked through the same doors under the same flickering school sign. But now, she walked taller. Not because she had fought Brady, not because she had won anything, but because she had refused to let someone else write her story in silence. Because she had reminded them all, without screaming, without begging, who she was. And they had listened. Finally, Grace wasn't just the new girl anymore, not just the black girl from the front of the bus. She was Grace, clear-eyed, measured, steady, the kind of person who picked her moments, who didn't perform for applause, who didn't fight for power, but for truth. She walked through the lunchroom and people didn't stare anymore. They noticed. She raised her hand in class and people listened. She existed now, not as a shadow or an outsider, but as herself. That afternoon, she sat alone on the edge of the school bleachers, watching the soccer team run drills. The wind tugged gently at her hoodie. Behind her, voices buzzed, students talking about weekend plans, homework, cafeteria drama, but she let the background fade. She was thinking about her dad, the way he used to lace her gloves slowly, patiently, as if every knot was a lesson, the way he never told her to punch first, but to know when enough was enough. "You don't swing to show off," he once said. "You swing when silence won't protect you anymore." Her mom picked her up after school that day, just like always. The car smelled like peppermint gum and soft fabric softener. Camille reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand before pulling off. "How was your week?" she asked. Grace glanced out the window. "Complicated, but better," Camille smiled faintly. "People still treating you like a problem?" "No," Grace said. "Now they're trying to figure out if I'm the answer." Camille chuckled. "Took them long enough?" Grace let herself smile. They drove in silence for a while, comfortable, unhurried. But as they reached the edge of the neighborhood, Grace turned toward her mom. "Thanks," she said. Camille raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For letting me handle it my way." Camille's voice was soft. "You never needed me to fight for you. Just needed me to remind you when you were ready to fight for yourself." Grace nodded, her throat tight. That weekend, something inside her shifted. Not loudly, not with fireworks, just enough. She didn't feel like a hero, didn't feel like some fearless warrior. She still had moments where she doubted, where she wondered if it would have been easier to say nothing. But then she'd remember Brady's stunned face, Miles's apology, Liana's quiet support, the girl in the hallway who'd smiled as they passed, and she'd remember silence might feel safe, but it doesn't always keep you whole. This story was never just about a bus ride. It was about voice, about knowing when to let silence sit and when to shatter it, about understanding that you don't need to yell to be heard, and you don't need to win to matter. Grace hadn't fought to be a symbol. She hadn't swung her fist to make a statement. She had drawn a line when no one else would, and in doing so, she gave others permission to do the same. By Monday, the school had moved on, as schools do. New gossip, new tensions. But Grace didn't shrink again. She sat where she wanted, spoke when she needed, smiled when she felt like it. She had become a quiet presence with sharp edges, a storm that no longer needed thunder to be felt. If you've ever been in Grace's shoes, quietly enduring, waiting for the right time. This is your moment, not to fight recklessly, but to speak when it matters, to draw your line gently, firmly, to be the kind of storm that doesn't tear things down, but changes the air around it. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to know who you are, and refuse to forget it when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Grace didn't punch to prove. She was tough. She punched because she was done being invisible. She didn't need a crowd to applaud. She didn't want a label. She just wanted space to be whole, and now she had it. She had earned it. And the world, her school, that bus, those halls, they would remember, because storms don't ask permission to arrive. They show up, they move through, and they leave things changed. Forever. Silence can be strength, but only when it's chosen, not forced. Stand firm, speak up, and never let fear decide your worth. Respect begins when we stop allowing injustice to go unchecked. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when no one else would? Tell us in the comments. Your voice might be the strength someone else needs today. If this story inspired you, like the video and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one.